when no one would even look upon us to offer us a ventilator or vaccines or anything, because it was the wild, wild, wild west, quite frankly. When no one would do it, the African Union and the Afro-Exim Bank stood up to the plate. And I remember chairing CARICOM as I was then, working with them to ensure that a country as small as St. Kitts and Nevis could secure access to therapeutics, vaccines, and equipment at the same price as a country as large as Nigeria. And equally, that India would then have responded, as we have celebrated recently with Prime Minister Modi's visit to the region, in being able to see us and feel us and hear us and give us when others who perhaps had deeper relationships failed so to do. I believe, therefore, that the concept of pooling, which is really a relation to functional cooperation, has to be embraced more vigorously by this Caribbean community, and that there are a number of common problems that most of us face. All of our countries, with the exception of Haiti, are underpopulated, declining and aging populations. In Barbados' case, 1 in every 2 people predicted by ECLAT will be over the age of 65 by the year 2050. Unsustainable. In the case of Trinidad and Jamaica, it is expected to be between 37% and 39% for the 2 countries. Unsustainable. And this is one area in which the region ought to be coming together to make collective decisions, because without people, you cannot sustain the level of growth that is necessary for us to adapt and to build resilience in this fight against the climate crisis that is going to take more and more lives and livelihoods away from us. I pray that we will find and summon the courage, but for me, that is the voice in my head that I hear from Michael Manley with respect to how love is interpreted and built out to ensure that we protect as many lives and livelihoods over the course of our future by recognizing that the way we built, the way we dealt with drainage, the way we dealt with roads, the way we dealt with public infrastructure, all of these things will now change because of the manner in which the climate crisis is unfolding upon our nations. Similarly, that we must try to negotiate all of this, as I said, with a very difficult foreign policy environment. And it is easy and perhaps attractive for some, and we will have to find tactical ways of dealing with it. But I have a very simple approach, that if we are going to say that you can't speak to one and you can't speak to another, then let it apply to all countries of the world. But to the last time I checked, everybody who is a mighty power speaks to everybody, even when they are at war. And therefore, the Caribbean region must retain its options always to maintain communication and to find the best opportunities for our development, because no one is giving us anything to help ourselves. And if we don't understand that it is self-reliance to build resilience, then we better wake up and smell the coffee fast, 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 because that is going to be the only way. This book speaks to resilience and self-reliance, and many of you know from hearing him directly that that was a central core philosophy, because in recognizing that you want independence of spirit, that you want to be friends of all and satellites of none, as Barbados defined its foreign policy to be in 1967 in the first address to the UN, that it means that you have to give yourself the capacity to defend that with dignity. Doesn't mean we will agree on everything, but it does mean that we have the right to communicate with whomsoever we please and on the terms that we believe to be appropriate to guide that level of communication. I want to suggest that one of the things, however, that we need to do is to turn inward. and to see how best collectively we can work together to develop that regional self-reliance. Domestic resource mobilization is absolutely critical. And unless we can find a way of financing those resilience building activities, they're not going to happen. That is why my country settled earlier this year a National Investment Resilience Plan for the next decade, because unless we have clarity as to what the public and the private sector must both do to build out those bridges of resilience, they will not happen. We have in the region a level of savings and excess liquidity that is there, in many instances earning at an interest rate much less than inflation. In my own country, a ridiculous amount of 0.1%. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, 0.5%. In the case of the Eastern Caribbean states, 2%. In Guyana, 2%. And in truth and in fact, divisions over who should finance a CARICOM development fund, which will only reach 200 million or 250 million, really ought to be put one side and a singular focus placed on how do we unlock some of the savings of the region to help finance the resilience and the development of the region while giving people a better interest rate on their savings. It may mean deconstructing a few rules and reconstructing and putting some additional guardrails in place. But it cannot be beyond the governors of the central bank and the ministers of finance of this region to ensure that our region's people have a better chance at earning on their savings while giving us the opportunity to finance a portion of our development as we seek to build resilience and develop adaptation plans. The truth is that we will have to do so with haste. But when we do so, and in the case of Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, the OECS, and Guyana, last week we realized that among the groupings in the Southern Caribbean, the excess savings are, and excess liquidity, is about $8 billion US. If we were to achieve just 1 or 2 billion of that, it gives us greater power in being able to mobilize the capital that is necessary globally, some of which has obviously to be grant and highly concessional funding. And that is why, and I come to discuss for us now, what is really the benefit of Michael Manley's legacy from the advocacy for a new international economic order and fairer terms for global economic activity and trade, to our own plans for the reform of the international financial system, which regrettably still carries all of the colors and trademarks of the imperial system that existed before the Bretton Woods institutions were established. When they were established, we simply did not exist as nation states. And that is why the Bridgetown Initiative today has been shaped, and it is by no means me alone, and let me say that for the record. We have taken some of the best in this region and globally and brought them together because it was clear to us that we need policy space and fiscal space. And that the notion of continuing to determine what we can borrow and who we can borrow from and at what interest rates purely on the basis of historic GNI or GDP is as relevant as asking me for my blood pressure 2 years ago to determine if I will have a stroke today. Utterly, utterly useless. The reality is that in the 3 iterations of that plan that we now have, we have seen some success. Barbados was the largest issuer of commercial paper with natural disaster clauses. God forbid, somebody knock wood for me, if we get hit by a serious hurricane. It will allow us to suspend all of our debt payments for 2 years and to pay them and bring them at the back end of the loan. It will release liquidity in the vicinity of about 19 to 20% of GDP in that 2-year period. There is no country or institution globally that will give us that kind of money, particularly when nation states are being forced to finance more and more damage, particularly because of the lack of access to insurance or the high premium that insurance is bringing down on businesses across our region because of the high exposure to catastrophic incidents in our region. That the World Bank today, under its new leadership president, Ajay Banga, has now accepted that it will do so and was responsive enough to make changes to it twice in a 6-month period, tells us that our voices are finally being listened to on key initiatives with respect to the reform of the system. That we have today a Resilience and Sustainability Trust at the International Monetary Fund, and that has the ownership of many, recognizing that this is the first long-term instrument that is being made 20 years, 10.5-year moratorium. It is true that the one constraint is that it is for those who have a relationship with the fund. And it is true that there is no quota for loss. But it is the first time that that institution has recognized, or any Bretton Woods institution or major development bank has recognized, that vulnerability ought to be the basis for concessional funding and not simply historic GDP and GNI. But does it stop there? No. We believe, and Bridgetown 3.0 says clearly, as I said earlier, there can be no separation of people and planet, and that we need to change the rules of the game. We need to ensure that our voices can be heard. We need to ensure that there is also the capacity to shock-proof our economies because of the scale of the polycrises that we're facing. And we need to ensure that we dramatically increase financing, not just for climate, but for sustainable development goals. Michael Manley would have been on the front line of this call for economic justice were he alive today. And that is why I make no apology in saying that the Bridgetown Initiative is an offspring of Michael Manley's advocacy and efforts for the construction of a new international economic order in the 1970s. But this document goes further, because it is really asking the world to make a quantum leap in terms of recognizing that in a globally interdependent world, we must recognize that there must be a global commons and there must be the protection of global public goods. And those goods are for us to be able to deal with and to prepare and adapt and to mitigate where possible the climate crisis and the loss of biodiversity. 2, as a subset of that, because we are human beings who cannot survive for long without food and water, that we address the issue urgently of food and nutritional security and water security. Thirdly, that we fight the pandemics, both the traditional ones and the silent slow motion pandemic of AMR to which I referred earlier. Fourthly, that in today's world where there are more and more people week by week emerging as victims of war and fragility, and in our own region, even though we do not have a theater of war, we have, regrettably, the spectacle of being the region that has the highest homicide rate in the world per capita. A totally unacceptable position, largely driven by paying a very heavy price, as I said recently in Barbados, for the Second Amendment rights of the Americans, because of the intrusion of guns and assault weapons that have no place in civilized society. And fifthly, the removal of digital illiteracy and the removal of the inequities that relate to it, starting first and foremost with the absence of access to electricity for over 600 million Africans, and building upon that to ensure that every child has access to some form of literacy that is enhanced by digital literacy, recognizing that access to education is the basis upon which we can secure the transformation and the protection of our societies and this world. And related to that are the two difficult issues that the global commons must recognize and confront. How do you deal with fake news in democratic societies which have the capacity to literally undermine the will of the people, largely because of the power of algorithms and the power of those who have access to be able to shape those algorithms? And how do we find the balance between the power of AI and the danger of AI, which threatens, like Frankenstein, to eat its creator? These are the 5 general precepts for the establishment of a global commons and the global public goods. The problem is that the world is saying, and there's some merit in it, that the developed countries themselves are saying that, especially with the spectacle of war and defense spending and other difficult fiscal adjustments coming out of COVID, that there may not be sufficient public money, as we traditionally know it, to finance these global public goods. Well, fine, if there is not traditional public money available, then let's redesign the system. You cannot tell me that it is okay to say the polluter must pay as a principle, and we simply forget it when it comes to how we treat to the global commons. You cannot tell me that a person who commits a tort is responsible at law at damages in private law. But in the public international sphere, we are not prepared to find modalities to hold people accountable. The reality is that the majority of multinational corporations, as you learned, as Michael Manley learned, even here with the bauxite companies in the 1970s, have balance sheets that will dwarf most of the states of the world that are not the large powers of the world. And therefore, there is a balance in asking those companies who either contribute to the problem or who may benefit egregiously from the solution that there is, to leave a few cents on the table. If this were a chocolate bar, and I asked you to leave 3 cents or 5 cents, you're taking a little piece of the corner, and you really would be asking me, you sure you don't want more? So that the threat of destabilization to those companies for contributing to the global commons is simply not there. But what it reflects is an equity, not inequity, an equitable solution to being able to allow us to balance out. We talk, and Barbados now chairs with France and Kenya, the Global Solidarity Committee on Levies, because we have to find a way, because the world, the climate is not waiting on us to solve Ukraine or to solve Gaza, to solve Syria, to solve the homicide rate in the Caribbean and Central and Latin America. It's not waiting on us. And we continue, therefore, to see the excesses unfold in ways that are now threatening basic food security in the region. Beryl caused crops to go. But it isn't only the multinational corporations, and let's break it down to give you an example before I move on, sorry. Fossil fuel companies can find a way of contributing a few cents in the dollar. Shipping companies who contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions but pay nothing. There is now a proposal that potentially can see them helping to finance, okay, ship owners' rebuilding of green ships, but equally leaving money for what is known as in-scope activity, in other words, coastal infrastructure, to be able to help countries build out and protect themselves and to provide the resilience that we need. Air traffic. We believe that there is no person who will stop traveling because if you put on a business travel ticket or a first class ticket, a mandatory contribution of $25 or $100 respectively, and leave economy without a mandatory commitment, so that people will be asked, because agency is important in fighting this battle. And you ask people, will you pay $5 for domestic or regional travel, or $10 for international travel to help save the planet? so that the people who benefit and whose children and grandchildren will benefit feel that they too are making a difference in the effort to save the world. And if you took it to pharmaceuticals and to pandemic, you would expect them to put their part. And if you took it to digital illiteracy, you would expect those companies that now have market capitalizations in the trillions of dollars to leave a little something on the table so that we can secure we're not going to make all the SDGs by 2030, but we must now prioritize to build the bridges that will unlock the rest. And that must mean fighting hunger and poverty. That must mean providing education across the world. That must mean ensuring that we have the technical capacity to unfold the benefit of renewable energy while at the same time creating the opportunities for green investment, because foreign capital alone will only make us tenants in our own land, and therefore the domestic resource mobilization and the aggregation of capital is necessary to balance the equation so our own citizens do not become tenants in their own land. I say these things because I genuinely believe that in the same way we saw over centuries the evolution of the joint stock company, in the same way we saw over centuries the emergence of the nation state, in the same way that we recognize that this is the beginning of the end of a current world order, that we have to be prepared to recognize and to determine what are the things that are necessary to secure lives and livelihoods, people and planet, without being wed to systems that are no longer working for us and that were made in the image of people who only want to dominate and exploit. That is the spirit of Michael Manley and the word of love being practiced. I say to you today that when all of that is combined, we still have to come back home to the most basic and elemental of truths. That you and you and you and you and you and me have first always to summon the courage and to look in the mirror and to believe, as Errol Barrow said, in our mirror image. To believe, as Marcus Garvey said, that it is critical that we emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. And we forge the strength and courage to develop the confidence, not just simply to say that no man is better than me and I am not better than any man, because our people now accept that. But coming with those rights now come responsibilities, because there is no right that can exist forever without a responsibility to tend to the things. A house, this building, you leave it unchecked and unattended for, and it starts to fall. You leave your body unattended for, it atrophies. And we as a region have a duty to have mature conversations, first to begin to understand how we can reclaim the mental landscape of our own citizens, recognizing, as I did in a CARICOM Ministers of Culture meeting as a young senator in this country 33, 34 years ago, that we will never be able to stop information from flowing in unless we close down our society. It's not practical. So that what we must do is root our people, so that when the gale force winds start to blow, the trees may bend, but they will not break. The roots are complex, and the educational system needs to be transformed to ensure, as difficult as it is, and believe you me, as I go through this process in Barbados, I know it is difficult, because nobody wants to feel as though they are on the front line of change, particularly when the change may have implications for their own household. But in the same way that a person who is a diabetic recognizes that if I don't make that decision to sacrifice a toe, I may make the foot or the leg, or worse than that, the body through sepsis, at risk. We as a region need to understand that the price of freedom is also equally the anchoring of responsibility in this Caribbean region. If we do not determined that it is our responsibility, yes, to produce global citizens, but anchored always with Caribbean roots, we may find ourselves simply as another satellite location of someone who wants to shape our mental landscape in an image to support their consumerism and to support their other plans. Guns don't walk and guns don't talk. The ability to boost our cultural confidence and to change our mental landscape and our attitudes towards work, towards how we treat one another, is at the core of what lies before us now. And if it was urgent when there was broadcasting from overseas, it is more urgent with the narrowcasting that takes place with these instruments that are in the hands of each and every one of our citizens, either directly or indirectly. I hope that we will learn from the language and from the teachings of Michael Manley as it relates to this area. Your country has proclaimed that the extent to which you felt proud and strong, and to which your artistic expression reflected that sense of pride, perhaps emerged more under Michael Manley than at any other period in your post-independence history. The passion with which he addressed these issues is clear to all. But what, for me, stands out is that it doesn't matter how much we talk about it. It is only in the expression of our actions that the true difference will come. And we've gotten aspects of it on the creative side correct. It is true that there are aspects that require greater conversation, because I say all the time, who is the greatest Caribbean artist of all time? And if it was Bob, I never heard him denigrate a woman in his lyrics, and I never heard him promote the use of violence and guns in his lyrics either. So how he gets so popular worldwide? And we have to start to have these conversations with ourselves in a way that recognizes that we are stewards of our landscape and our environment for the time that we are here. I believe that that is not only going to show a benefit with respect to the reduction of violence and the management of conflict, but in the increased productivity and in the changing of our attitudes towards work, and to recognize that work is not a dirty four-letter word, as it was intended to be when slaves were forced to do it without reference to day or night, or pain or pleasure. But work truly is something that can bring dignity, because work is at the core of each person's ability to chart their destiny as individual citizens capable of being able to make decisions, because freedom is choice. And if we can have the capacity to give a person shelter that they can earn and pay for, and food that they can earn and pay for, and the pleasures that they would like, then we will be a better society. But many of these things relate not just to the concept of love or the concept of Ubuntu, I am because we are, the commonalities of that, or the commonalities of the principle of covenants that the Jewish people speak of with respect to being able to come together to do things that which neither of us can achieve on our own. This is what the world requires of us now, as we search for where this new world order is going to emerge and land. There are going to be difficult conversations. There are going to be impossible conversations and options sometimes. But what matters more is our commitment to love, solidarity, and justice, and the building of a resilient spirit that will allow us to march out, just as I can't see the people at the back because of that light. There are elements of how we shall walk by faith, anchored in principles, because we simply do not know what next year this time, or even as we saw with France and Syria, next week this time will look like. I want to use some words that stuck with me at the end of this book for us to reflect on. And I say to my own people and to all Caribbean people, if you have not had the pleasure of reading The Politics of Change, please do so. There are one or two things that may not be appropriate, but there is much that still guides us. And if we accept that this is a relay race in the land of relays, then we have a duty, as the Talmud tells us, to recognize that we may not be expected to complete the task, but neither are we at liberty to resile from it. Each generation must make progress. Each generation must carry the baton ahead. But each generation will have doubts sometimes. And that is why I quote these words and commend them to you, as I have for myself. And I quote, "It takes great clarity of vision and consistency of purpose to hold to policies in the face of the articulate opposition through which small but vocal groups try to divert us from our purpose. And finally, in the small hours of the night, when uncertainty and the consciousness of human frailty tend to creep up on their unsuspecting victims, it takes a will of iron to hold to your course and to know that you are summoned by fate to common sense, to compassion, and to unswerving purpose. If the moral purpose of this mission is to remain intact, it must be approached in humility and supported by prayer. Hegel once remarked that, and I quote, "History is the march of God in the world," unquote. Ours, then, is the task to see that the road tends towards justice. My friends, the story of Michael Manley is not just the story of Jamaica. It is ours in the region, in the Caribbean, and it is ours in the global South. His legacy belongs to every Caribbean child who dreams, to every Caribbean worker who struggles, and indeed to every Caribbean leader who dares to hope but remains determined to do. Against that backdrop, I say, let us not honor him with words. Let us make his vision our mission. Let us agree that there is a floor below which no Caribbean citizen should be allowed to go as we build out this region. Let us agree that growth without equity is not growth that we want. Let us say with conviction that this Caribbean region will rise not because we're big, but because we're brave. And because we understand who we are. And we understand what our mission is. And we understand that a people who have been dehumanized and oppressed for decades and centuries have a duty to be able to pay forward in the form of a humanizing influence on a world that is riveted now by man-made emotions such as greed and conflict and war. And if they are man-made, they can be unman-made. Let us stay focused, not because we are rich, but because we labor in a righteous cause. In a righteous cause. And we remind the world that we who represent a little piece of every civilization on this earth know what it is to be able to want to ensure the survival of every civilization and every aspect of our humanity. We do so simply because it will lead us to our best future. And we do so because we have a love for people and planet that requires of us actions that perhaps no previous generation has had to confront in terms of the duality of extinction. Arrogance will cause us to believe that we will not become extinct as a race, but other human organisms, other living organisms, have become extinct in our certain knowledge.
Hi guys, welcome back once again to my YouTube channel. If it's the first time you have come across my video, don't forget to like this video, subscribe and share. Okay guys, I hope you have watched the full clip. And Mottley, the PM of Barbados, is the one of a kind of a leader who a lot of people really admire, and is that kind of a leader who truly speaks for the right of the black people. And she has really come out and speak a lot about the Caribbean country, how Caribbean countries should unite and should become together and as one, how they should also grow together because they are from the same place. And she has really came out and complained about those either bad leaders or corrupt leaders. And she has came out and said that when a country or when one of the Caribbean island has a puppet leader or a greedy leader or a corrupt leader, it will make the country not, or the island not, to go or grow as they want. They just want the countries to be ruled by better leaders. And she has said that the change is coming and the revolution has started. Those countries that have either colonialists in their country or they have colonialist system in the country, change is coming, and it's high time they remove all the colonialists in their country, because they want all the Caribbean countries to grow the same. They want all the Caribbean countries to support each one another. They don't want those Caribbean countries, or even not only in Caribbean but only also African countries, not to support one another. They just want all these countries to support one another, so at least it can lead to a better government, or it can lead to a better leadership. You know, when a country has a good leader or a better leader who understands the will, or who really understands the problem of his local people, it really grows, or it really develops a lot, because he will go and listen to the problem of his people, and he will do what his people want to do. If his people are complaining that in his country or in his island there is insufficient food supply, a good leader will make sure that he has done a better thing to make that his country or his island has gotten enough food for his or our own people to eat. If you go and listen to the people's problem, whereby they say that there is high unemployment rate in his country, look at countries like in Africa, there is a lot of high unemployment rate because of either greedy leaders or corrupt leaders, because they don't want to do the will, or they doesn't want to do what the people want them to do. There is a lot of high unemployment rate. The class between the poor and the rich is so big. There is a big class between the poor and the rich, whereby a lot of people are suffering, local people especially. If you doesn't have any connection to either one of the governmental system or to any leaders, you can't be employed. And this is what's really affecting some African countries and even some Caribbean countries. A lot of people are being unemployed because of either bad leaders, or either for those leaders that they elected, that they doesn't want to hear what they want. And this is the reason why some of the countries, they are really struggling. Look at a country like Nigeria. Nigeria is famous in mining oil, and this is the country that should be the most successful country in Africa. But if you look at its history, it's just struggling like other African countries. And it's really high time for us African people and Caribbean people to rise up, as Mottley has said. Let us elect those leaders that really understand our problem. Let us elect those good leaders that are not corrupt, that will care for the human people's right, but not for those greedy leaders that will just want to put a lot of money in their pocket just to make sure that they have satisfied themselves. Let us all leader go with the way of Mottley, or let us all leader be like Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, whereby he removed all colonial system to save his people, to save his country, and it has really developed. So to Caribbean people and to African people, let us join our hands together. We elect better leaders, and we also pray to God to help us to elect good leaders so that they won't be perfect to our system. They won't be corrupt, because if they will be corrupt, us local people are the one who are suffering. Us local people, we are the one who will not, our children will not get better education. Our old people won't be treated in a better hospital. Our infrastructure, our road infrastructure will be poor, whereby if a country has a poor infrastructure, that's kind of an undevelopment. So let us choose a better leader and we support what Mottley has said. So guys, thank you so much for your time. If it was for the first time coming across my video, don't forget to like this video, subscribe and share. Thank you so much for your time. May God bless you.